I'm Judy Sullivan. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Meeting Street, and I want to welcome everyone here. I see a lot of familiar faces, a lot of friendly faces, all friendly faces, but a lot of familiar ones, and some others who are probably new friends of ours at Meeting Street. We're delighted to have so many people here for our second in our series of parent workshops. And this is one that's of particular interest to people. It's the IEP process. And the best part about this is that we have Mark Dana from Dana & Dana, who's going to be handling this for us. He's not only a well-known attorney who has represented maybe some of you here in the room in your efforts to advocate for your children, but also is a parent of a graduate of Meeting Street.
Graduated 2 years ago. He started here 20 years ago.
20 years ago. So I was involved with Meeting Street many years ago and joined about a year and a half ago, and I always say that there's a magic about Meeting Street, and when you're here, you really never leave, and you never lose that magic. And Mark's a good example of that. Here he is giving back to you. So without further ado, there's lots about Mark. I'm sure you have, they can go on and look at it, but he did receive a big service award from the Rhode Island Bar Association for his work with in the special education field with special needs children. So he's a real expert, and we're lucky to have him.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. This is my partner and son, Austin Dana. He's also going to be presenting, and he's learning the aspects of all different types of law, but special education is very interesting to both of us and my entire family because of my son, his brother Joshua, who was born in 1989 with profound disabilities. And you know, when that happens, you think your world's coming to an end, but it's opened so many doors for me in helping so many people. And this is just a part of that. And I advocate only for parents. I don't represent districts. I never have. And our contention is that the parents should be equally equipped with what the knowledge is of the law to the best that they can, because it's extremely voluminous. There's a lot of law out there. And what I want to do tonight is be able to break it down a little bit, give you what you need to have. I don't want to talk tonight, I'll answer your questions about due process. Maybe another night we can talk about that. Hopefully none of you ever have to get to that point. But tonight's more about the IEP process and what you do and what you can do to advocate for your child during the IEP, and what you need to arm yourselves with before the IEP, so that you can advocate the best that you can for your child. And I am convinced, having been a parent for so long of a child with special needs and being an attorney in this area, that educators know your child and they know what's good for your child in terms of education. No one knows your child as well as you do. And so if you can get educators and other people around that table to listen to you, not just as a parent, but as somebody who really knows this child and knows what clicks, you're halfway home. So Austin's going to start the process through the PowerPoint, and I'm going to pick it up in a few minutes, and then we'll answer any questions that you may have about this process or anything else you might want to ask us about. And feel free to, as we go through this, to have pizza, drinks, whatever you want. Don't hesitate to get up if you want to.
Hello everyone. I'm going to start off by talking a little bit about what you should do before the IEP meeting itself. So the first thing that's up on the slide here is to make sure that the people you want there are there. And these are people who have done evaluations on your child, educators of your child, anyone who you think should be there to help you advocate on the behalf of your child. Get in touch with them. Make sure that they're at the meeting. The second thing that we have up here is to have your evaluations to the district before the IEP. The district will do evaluations of your child, and they should be paying for it. If you want further evaluations done on your child, you should have them done. But make sure the district has copies of those evaluations before the IEP meeting so that everyone's on the same page when you get there. Visit the school as close to the IEP date as possible. And don't just visit and look at the classroom, visit when your child's there. be able to gauge what's going on in the classroom, how they're interacting with teachers, get a good feel as to where they're at, what's working, what's not working, so that you're prepared when you walk into the IEP meeting. Finally, confirm who will be present to make agreements from the district. The regulations require that somebody from the district with the power to negotiate and make decisions is at the IEP meeting. If there's no one from the district there who can make a decision, it's a waste of everyone's time. So confirm that there will be someone there with the power to make a decision and negotiate with you before you go to the IEP meeting. Finally, dig out the current IEP. That's going to be a jumping off point for this IEP meeting that you're having presently. You're going to want to be able to make sure that you can go back and say, this is where we were last year, this is where we've come, what are our goals for next year? Once you get to the IEP meeting itself, bring that IEP that you dug out with you. And we said keep the needs of your child at the forefront and on the front burner. And always allow the district to present. Hear them out. You may not like what they're saying, but listen, be respectful. You always catch more flies with honey. That's really the case here. If you start off on the wrong foot with a district, these are people you're going to be dealing with for decades. You want to keep a cordial relationship with them. And keep it positive. It's your child who you want at the forefront. Don't let quarrels between you and people from the district get in the way of what's important for your child at the end of the day. There were some changes to the IDEA in 2004. These are some things that we think you should be aware of, and there are many others. First, districts must have highly qualified teachers. And there are definitions of what a highly qualified teacher is, but to suffice it to say, for the purposes of this presentation, there are requirements, and they must be highly qualified. Changing the IEP can now happen without a meeting. Back in 2004, you had to actually have a meeting with members sitting at a table. Everyone had to be present. That's no longer the case. You can change the IEP without a meeting, and reevaluation meetings and IEP meetings can be one and the same at this point. As I said, not all members need to be present at the IEP meeting anymore, and conference calls are an acceptable way to have the IEP meeting. I'm going to turn it back over to my dad to talk to you a little bit more.
All right, where did we leave off here? This aspect of parental consent has also been a change which can really cause you problems, so be aware of it. What we're saying here is that, and Congress was not real clear when they made this change, is that if a parent does not agree to an initial placement, so the district comes, sits down and says, this is what we think based on our evaluations, and the parents say, well, based on our evaluations, this is what we have. On an initial placement, after eligibility has been determined, if at that point you do not consent and you do not go to due process, the law now says, for all practical purposes, the district can just walk away from your child. And you don't want to get into that, all right? You're going to need, if you have a difference of opinion on an initial evaluation, you're going to need to try and work it out. If you can't work it out, then you may have to go to due process. But if you don't work it out and you don't go to due process, these are the consequences. The district does not have to convene an IEP meeting. They could just say, and it may have happened to some of you, this is what we're offering, and if you don't like it, that's fine. We don't need another meeting. The district is not subjected to due process. You can file for due process, but if the position is that the parents aren't cooperating, either they're not coming to the meetings or they're just completely disagreeing with the district, then you may have a problem with due process. And the district ultimately, under the new regs, under these regs, believe it or not, and I've been doing this 20-something years, I never thought I'd see regulations that are this much of a change. Under this narrow scenario, on an initial placement, the district does not have to provide services at that point because there's a breakdown. So that initial phase of your child's educational plan, whether the child is 3 or 4, or has had a 504, and then all of a sudden everyone says, you know, there's eligibility here under IDEA, let's do an IEP, that's an initial IEP. So initially when this was done, there was a dispute as to whether this is about all IEPs or just initial IEPs. Various circuits have now held that this is initial IEPs where this is discussed. So if you already have IEPs, there's already eligibility, this narrow area is not an issue for you. But if you're starting a new IEP or eligibility has just been determined, be aware of those consequences.
So I guess, I'm sorry, so I guess you're saying if you already have an IEP, you're kind of grandfathered into the services provided?
Well, not the services provided, but once you have an IEP, the district can't just wash their hands of your child. But that initial IEP, in effect, what Congress has said is that, look, if the district's proposing something and the parents are disagreeing with it on an initial IEP development, under those circumstances, if the parents say no and they don't go to due process, the district says, I'm not doing anything further. They can sit there and not do anything, which has never been the case before these amendments. Does that?
No,
Yeah, okay. But yeah, if you have an IEP, that doesn't apply to you. The IEP content, obviously the strengths and needs of the child, the concerns of parents regarding the educational position, the results of the most recent evaluation, as Austin just indicated, those evaluations are critical. Now you know, many of you should know that you're entitled to an evaluation at the expense of the district. The district will oftentimes have an issue with who you use as an evaluator. Depending on the type of evaluation you're looking for, if you know of somebody that's going to give an evaluation that is going to benefit your child, have that evaluation done, even if it's not at the expense of the district. It's worth its weight in gold, not just for a single year, but probably for 2 or 3 years down the road until another one is needed. So those evaluations are very, very important. The regs require that the IEP be based in part, almost largely in part, on these evaluations. Districts can't fight with evaluations, all right? They can present their own evaluations, and then you can have a due process based on a fight of the experts. But that's a much better position to be in than to show up at an IEP meeting without any evaluations. And this academic development and functional needs of the child is very important, because oftentimes, especially with kids who have Asperger's, very, very common, where the district will say, straight A's. That's not IDEA. IDEA says it's not just the educational component, it's the social component as well. And that's a very good example. I've represented a lot of kids with Asperger's, and the districts are of that position. Well, you know, he's getting an A in chemistry. Well, yeah, but he melts down to go to gym, so you got to address it. So those are the various aspects that you should be aware of. It's not just education, and every circuit in the country has now accepted that. It's not just, in terms of a lot of you folks, there's a case that came out of, I want to say Cedar Rapids. The name was Jarrett versus Cedar Rapids. And the issue in that case was whether or not the district is responsible to have a nurse present to assist with the ventilator that the young man was on. And it was the district's position, no, we don't. It's not an educational need. And the United States Supreme Court took the case. And the United States Supreme Court said, no, the child is not going to get an education if the child's ventilator is not working. So you're responsible for that. So a lot of these areas have broadened and become very effective. Yes?
Just going back to the evaluation piece, so obviously if there's conflicting evals, then the school has something to know, but if there's recommendations made in the evaluations, and there's no contraindicating evaluation, is the school then liable to uphold those recommendations?
They have to, the regs require that if they are not going to accept an evaluation, they have to put in the meeting notes why. So many of you who know me know that one of the first things I ask is, what do the meeting notes say? Because those notes require that if they're going to reject an evaluation or a placement, they have to explain why.
And it has to be in the formal IEP meeting notes?
Yes, it has to be in the notes of the IEP meeting. So, and you need to ask them. Say, look, this is what we have. You know, assuming they have nothing, what's your basis for rejecting this? Or if they have something, then, you know, then you're going to have to go back and forth with that. And that's the other aspect of this. If you can have that person present, it really serves its purpose to have that person present. And I know that's very difficult sometimes, especially depending on what the who the evaluator is. But it's really important because ultimately, I find that districts will argue less if you've got a really, really good evaluation.
And should you always get copies of those meeting notes automatically, or do you have to request them typically after?
You request them. They won't give them to you generally unless you request them. And you're entitled to everything in your child's records. Within 10 days of your written request, they need to give you everything in that record.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Could you define the word functional a little more?
Well, it would be, well, it depends on the child, I guess. I could give you an example of my child. Functional would be whether or not my son Joshua is capable of putting, you know, certain things in a bucket. All right, that is his functional equivalent in terms of his motor skills, his gross motor skills. It varies with different kids, but the point is it's not just academic.
If you have an evaluation that is directed towards gross motor skills,
Okay.
but not affecting learning at this particular time, based on a very brief screen,
Yeah.
do you have any recourse?
You have a good recourse because that's the point I want to make. It's not just on academics.
That's what we're being told.
No, it's not. It's not.
Not affecting,
No, it's not just based on academics. I mean, my Asperger's example was an example of that districts will often say, this kid's just doing fantastic, getting all A's in all, you know, AP courses, but the social component isn't there. There are thousands of cases throughout the country that indicate that a child's social skills are a component of his education under an IEP.
But what about motor skills, like the inability to walk upstairs or the inability to tie shoelaces?
Those are a part of it. Absolutely, those are a part of it. Yes.
Isn't it true, correct me if I'm wrong, that an IEP can't be written strictly for physical therapy services?
Correct, because that's right. That's right. I mean, I want to be clear on that. There's first off, to be eligible, it has to fall under a certain category, and that category has been expanding since I've been doing this work. But you're not going to get an IEP for just physical therapy, right? That does not mean that if your child is eligible and is in need of physical therapy, and you have a physical therapist saying this is the type of services this child needs, that they can just say no. Does that make sense to you? But the social component is a component of which I've done due process hearings on. The developmental is. And so it's important, and because, you know, when you talk of special needs, they run the gamut. I mean, recently Congress allowed ADHD and ADD to become diagnoses for which a child can be found eligible for services under IDEA. A lot of us in this room, if we have children that went here, are far more on the other side. I mean, my son is oxygen dependent, so we had to have oxygen tanks out here for him. That is a part of their education under this case I mentioned under Cedar Rapids. So it's much bigger than you think, and if the district tries to narrow you, that's not right. Yeah.
I think just to follow up on what they're asking, we're talking about accessing education, right? So my child, for instance, has issues with occupational and physical therapy needs, and so his ability to actually be educated is impacted by the physical needs, and that's why he has an IEP, because he doesn't have any educational or social needs in there. It's all physically based, and it's about his ability to actually access education, is what it's been explained to me.
Based on his physical needs. Yeah. I think that's absolutely true, and you know, cognitive ability, we see nowadays that people are able to utilize computers with their eye. And there's cognitive ability in those people. But if they were children under IDEA, they would be able to have a computer so that they can communicate or access, even though their cognitive function is 100%.
So I'm just following up on
No, I want to be clear on that the educational component is not limited to what you can do within the curriculum. To some extent it is. But remember the example I say on Cedar Rapids. The child would not be educated if the child can't breathe. And that's what the Supreme Court said. Yeah.
So if we had a situation like the one that we were in as little as a year ago, where we had a full-blown evaluation, we had a clear diagnosis of Asperger's and a bunch of other things, the doctor was present at the meetings with the district people looked at some and said, well, he's almost proficient. I mean, he's just barely below it. You don't get what's the next step? To sue them? Or is there something short of
well, I mean, if the issue is, and
they basically were saying academically he doesn't really have that many problems.
So was the issue eligibility?
Yeah.
Okay, and it will be with kids with Asperger's, right? It will be with kids with Asperger's, and that tells you a lot of things. One, it tells you that whoever you were dealing with doesn't understand Asperger's. One, the second point is that you either educate them through these people who know your child, or you file for due process. Unfortunately it's a limited. I mean, I've got a case right now where this girl is absolutely off the charts smart, but she's got defiance that's affecting her. And those things, those type of behaviors, the law requires that there be a behavioral plan put in place, that you determine what we call a manifestation, that manifestation is coming from these behaviors are stemming from the disability. The district can't just say, she's never coming, so we can't educate her. There has to be a manifestation determination. Once that manifestation determination is made, then under those circumstances, if it is coming from the disability, a behavior plan has to be put into place, which is attached to the IEP. That's the law. Yeah.
Does it vary from city to city? If you, say you were in Pawtucket and you met with them and got evaluated there, could you feel assured that they would feel necessarily the same as, say, Barrington or Providence or one of those other communities?
I'll say this. I think that every district, especially now with the economy being as it is, and they're in a tough spot. And that's why when we talk about, working with them, try and understand their position. They are, especially the pupil personnel, these are people who have probably not necessarily been told about their budget, but understand that they've got to do something about that. And conversely, many of them, and most of them, I find, want to make the education appropriate. Does it, over the time I've been doing this, does it vary from district to district in the state? It most certainly does. Yeah, it does. And then that's a whole nother issue as to whether you move from town to town. What is the second town that you move to? Are they required to have that IEP, or can they start a new IEP? So that's a whole nother issue, but it does vary from town to town here. And that variation isn't based on anything malicious. That variation is based in part on the budget of the town. Let's see where we are here. Present levels of performance. And I touched on a lot of this already, but let me just finish up with this. How does the disability affect the progress involvement in the general education curriculum? So that would be, first off, accepting the fact through evaluations that this disability is causing some problems in what otherwise would be general education classroom. Secondly, as I said before, social goals and behavior is still in there, all right? The social aspect is still in there, and it's usually the problem with districts, because if the child is cutting the grade, B's, C's, or even A's, they tend to meet with you and say either that child is not eligible, or conversely, he may be or she may be eligible, but we can do this through a 504. So be cautious about that. They had taken out short-term objectives, that they're no longer required, these certain short-term objectives, but many, many districts in Rhode Island still include them. All right. Also, annual goals. There needs to be a statement of, this is, if you remember nothing else, remember this, measurable. Measurable. Rhode Island Department of Education has now formatted your IEP to be a certain way, and within that, it's got to be measurable. How many times would my son be able to go up the ramps here at Meeting Street using his wheelchair? They measured it. Very, very important for autistic children, especially if you're utilizing a applied behavioral analysis, which is a method of teaching autistic students. You've got to use measurable goals. The regs require measurable goals. So when you look at a district and the district says teacher observation, it just comes out of the page to me. It's not what's required. Let's measure it. Let's figure out where this child is, how many times and how many, successes and how many times has this happened, and let's put it to good use and use it to move forward. It's designed, of course, it's designed to meet the child's needs that are from the disability and to make progress in the general education curriculum, as we already spoke about, and to meet each of the child's educational needs. So the front page is still going to discuss needs, and the rest of that document should clearly indicate through evaluations and educators and parents how we get there. All right, here are the needs. Joshua's not going up with the wheelchair, he's just letting his arms go. What do we do to change that? As I spoke about, you described the method of measurement. The method of measurement, not just the measurement. How are we going to measure this? How are we going to determine? And let me say this about measuring these, the method of measurement. Pick your battles with this. Otherwise, your IEP is going to be 600 pages. So figure out presently as a team where your child is in terms of their different needs and what really needs to be measured to move forward. All right. When my son was here, the communication aspect was always a challenge. He's nonverbal. So we tried a lot of different things, and we would, throughout trying these things, figured out the rate of success through the method of measurement. And by doing that, we knew whether sign worked for him, whether his communication was through a storybook or a picture book, and everybody was willing to work and see what worked best for him. And kids are kids. One year it might work, another year it might not. So now he's got a mishmash of different ways to communicate with us, which is sort of cool. As I indicated, there's no longer short-term goals or benchmarks, but many of the districts still include them. And as we spoke about before, bring the current IEP and compare it. Make sure that the IEP that you are now looking at shows that you're moving from IEP A to IEP B and moving forward. What are the services to be provided? And that would be what are the services will get them to the goals, and include related services in that. Obviously, related services are very, very important for all of our children, and those have to be included. If you're dealing with physical therapy, for example, the districts, just because it's been such a difficult time financially, when I started this, I was seeing the least of the districts giving physical therapy to kids that really needed it 2 hours a day. Now I'm seeing 2 hours a week. Now I'm seeing it an hour and a half a week. And again, the reason for that is that they just, there's just not enough money to hire these types of physical therapists or any of the related services. Or what they may do is say, well, they're getting their service while in the classroom. That's a very common thing these days. And that might be okay for you, depending on your child, but be aware that oftentimes that is, we're trying to do the best we can, we really are, but we've got one physical therapist for 3 schools, and I don't know what else we can do. And what I have found over the years is that if you talk to the district and you understand their concerns and their issues, that you'll get something back. Because a lot of times parents don't, and believe me, I understand why, but they have their limitations, especially these days. They really do. Include whatever supplementary aids are needed, all right? And describe whatever program modifications are going to be in place. So whatever alters the program for the child has to be written into the IEP. Inclusion. The base of Congress's base level is an assumption that the child will be in a regular education setting, and then you go from there, all right? If they're not going to be in a regular education setting, the district needs to explain why that is the case. And of course, for many children here, sometimes it still has to be explained why, but that there's a reason for it. When my son started here, there was not inclusion in this school. And when I had clients in the 90s, that was the big argument by the district, that the least restrictive environment, they'd be in their own home school, they would be with other kids, they would be with typically developing kids. Well, Meeting Street's done an incredible job in terms of getting typically developing kids in this system, and I don't hear that argument anymore, because 50% of the kids in the school here are typically developing. It's a wonderful, wonderful, magical thing, I think. But I don't get that argument anymore from the districts, because Meeting Street, has typically developing in here. Accommodations. This is for the assessments. The assessments are growing over the years. If you need some alternative assessment, it needs to be explained in the IEP. Is the alternative assessment appropriate? Any accommodations for assessment must be in the IEP. By the way, this entire thing is on our webpage, and I don't know if we told them our webpage. Oh, you could write it down. All right. Transition services after your child turns 16. They need to be updated annually. Again, and I know I'm touting Meeting Street, but I can only speak from my experience. I'm talking as a parent now. Their ability to see what my son could do once he's out of here was remarkable. We went to a lot of different places. We talked a lot about transition, and it needs to start at 16, and they do it here. If your district's not doing it, get them to do it, because other than early intervention, my son's 23, the toughest transition is from 21 on. Now, a part of this I didn't put in here is that RIDE has developed a new formula for certain children, whether they're going to get a diploma or a certificate at 21. Depending on your child, I would go with a certificate at 21. If you get the diploma when they graduate, you're not going to get the services up until 21. So be aware of that. And the transition services still need to meet the goals that the child has, whatever that might be, whatever you think your child's going to be able to do, has to be in the IEP. So come 16, it starts changing a little bit, and you start looking at 16 to 21 as to, okay, where are we going? How are we going to make this transition? The top 10 pitfalls, and then I think we're just about done, and I can take more questions if you like. A new thing, I don't know if any of you have experienced this with districts, discussing ESY as a separate IEP. Again, it's the economy. You'll meet at an IEP and the district will say to you, well, let's just get through this year, and then in May we'll reconvene for extended school year. And they're doing that because they don't know where the child's going to be. They don't know the program that they're going to put the child in, even though he or she is eligible for extended school year. That is not the law. The law requires annual IEPs. Doesn't mean it has to be every September. That would make it impossible to get anything done in September, but it has to be an annual IEP. So when the district says, let's look at extended school year down the road, you should politely say, well, I'd like to talk about it now, and if nothing else, you get out from them that there really isn't one yet. So do your IEPs as full IEPs, annual IEPs. If you come not prepared, you're going to have a problem. And we spoke about that, evaluations and all the other parts of it. Losing sight of your child needs. And none of us do that intentionally, obviously, but I have done it, where you're focusing on other aspects, and your child, their needs are changing, and you're looking at this, and you're thinking about who the teacher is going to be. The law doesn't require the same teacher. It doesn't require the same aide. If they want to switch things up, they have every right to do that. So you're going to have to deal with the new person, and you're going to have to educate the new person on your child, and you're going to have to focus on the needs of your child with that new person. Surprises. Don't agree to anything if it's a surprise. It's that simple. If you're sitting around an IEP meeting and all of a sudden somebody says, well, you know, let's try X. Don't agree to it until you have time to think about it, and whatever X is, until you have time to talk to a person who knows X. Just give yourself that time to think about it. Verbal agreements. This has changed a little bit. IDA no longer requires after the initial IEP that you sign the IEP, but you have to agree to it, all right? Be cautious, because those IEP notes might come back, parent agrees to this. And you may, I get that a lot from parents. They say, I never agreed to this. I said, well, it's in the notes. So be careful what you're agreeing to verbally. We talked about bringing your current IEP, about not raising your concerns. Sometimes these are tough. You'll have, the majority of the table will be the district, and then there's mom and dad. And they'll be telling you, they'll go around the table, you know, they did this, they do this, they're doing fine here, they're doing fine here. And you don't always raise your concerns, all right? IDEA requires that your concerns be noted and marked down in the notes, and make sure that they are. Yeah?
In what section of the IEP is it best to have parent concerns, like, or just visions and things like that? I know there's very clear cut in Massachusetts, but like, it's always like that question, where do you put that in?
Where do you put what? I'm sorry.
Like parental concerns and visions, you know, their concerns with their child, their concerns.
There isn't one. What's in the IEP is, have the concerns of the parents been addressed? Right. Check yes or no, yes. And then, so that wouldn't be in the IEP, but it will be in the IEP notes in Rhode Island. All right, so you got to make sure that they're in there. My concern is this, and so.
Again, it goes back to making sure you're requesting a copy of the notes of the IEP.
Yes, it does, and make sure that you're asking, you're letting them know that you have a concern that's documented.
I'd like to say, I'm not a lawyer, but I'm an experienced parent, and one thing I learned that was very important was to put it in writing and CC it to several people. That way they can't say, you never brought that up. You know, even if you CC it to the superintendent, you CC it to your pediatrician. I used to make a list of CCs, and that way you're leaving a paper trail.
No, that's a good point. Losing your cool. This happens a lot, and I mean, what's more important? You know, I mean, nobody signed us up for this, so it's one thing to have to care for your child. It's another thing to have to deal with a district that you think is being unreasonable. I mean, it's just an added burden. One of the reasons I started doing this work is because we got enough on our plate. But having said that, don't raise your voice. You know, just don't. Just don't. If you have to leave the room, leave the room. But remain professional. It's in your child's best interest. It really is. Because I can guarantee if you lose your cool, it'll be in the notes. Raise it. That's right. You don't. That's true. Raising your home issues. And I spoke earlier about the fact that you know your child better than anybody else. And although that's true, you're going to get a disparity with districts who say, well, we don't see that here. You know, we don't see that here. We don't see that here. And you go back, well, at home they're doing this, at home they're doing that. It goes back to what Austin said. Go back to the classroom, take a look. Take a look yourself. Focus on here. Focus on the education. Focus on the classroom. Because you're oftentimes going to get the district saying, you know, we just don't see it. I mean, we can't put it in the IEP. We can't try and obtain services for it. It doesn't exist. And, you know, maybe they're missing it. Maybe, I don't think the children act too differently, although my son oftentimes acted differently at home, probably far worse than at Meeting Street. But.
So what you're saying is that if you notice an issue that your child is having and the school is not saying that they see it, go and visit and sit, ask to observe in the classroom.
Absolutely, you have every right to do that.
Point things out.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, and yeah, that's exactly right. And if you're saying you see it at home, and they're saying we don't see it at school, they're not going to come to your home, and it doesn't matter if they did. You've got to go to the school and see, oh, this is sort of what I'm talking about. You know, I had a little girl a few years back who had seizures, and the district was saying, we just don't see them. And the parents are saying, these happen all the time at home. And sure enough, the district really wasn't looking at what those seizures were, and she was having them. And so it helps. So you got to get in there and be proactive. And again, not reviewing the minutes of the meeting or the notes of the meeting, and I've spoken about that at great length. And that sort of concludes it, but I'm more than willing to take more questions if anybody has more questions. Yeah.
I actually had an IEP meeting tomorrow.
Uh-oh.
My son's going into kindergarten. We are in North Providence. He was initially speech-limited. We did have some developmental delays. Fortunately, we've been very good with our IEP process. I took some classes at Rankin, so I was familiar with the measurable goals, what we should be looking for, so we've had good luck there. Our concern now is that he goes to an elementary school that's not our home school. He's been there for 2 years. He's done really well. His preschool teacher would like him to continue in an integrated kindergarten classroom, but as I know right now, there isn't one offered in North Providence. I think there's been a lot of grumblings from parents trying to get an integrated classroom open, so.
Is he presently in a self-contained?
He was last year, but now he's in an integrated.
Oh, he is. He's presently in an integrated classroom. All right. And your meeting's tomorrow?
Yes.
All right. Probably, and is he going to a different classroom, or that's the issue?
It's kind of twofold, because we want to keep him where he is.
Okay.
It's not his home school.
All right.
But if we lobby on integrated classroom, we can guarantee that will still be there.
I see.
So.
Well, the whole homeschool thing doesn't, I mean, they have to be educated if possible at the home school, but nowadays with schools closing, certain programs are going to be in certain schools and other programs aren't. And they've got to design a program that meets your child's needs. That's the bottom line. I'd be hard pressed to think that they're going to say we don't have a program for your child's needs. And then once you know what that program is, the question becomes whether or not you think it's appropriate. Based on, you said there's an evaluation.
No, he doesn't. It was just a speech delay for him. So
oh, okay.
Yeah, he's come a long way.
Oh, all right.
We're not talking to now, kind of filling in silence almost.
Okay.
So we're good there.
I see.
But there's no integrated classroom that I know of in the town. So
interesting.
The parents, the teacher. I saw the teacher on the playground today, and she can't, officially talk amongst parents, but we're talking. We all know, what our issue is. So we're trying to see, does the district need to come up with some type of integrated classroom?
Certainly sounds like it.
Kids?
Right.
Like, do we need to pressure them?
Right. And well, be careful on the pressure. One of the first sets of cases I had was in East Greenwich, where they didn't have a program, this is years and years ago, for young autistic children. And a group of parents got together and said, this is what we want within the district. And they developed it, and it's actually still running today. So, I mean, you want to let, it's not going to, it might not happen overnight, but if you let them know this is what's needed, and if you put it together, we're going to stay within the district, we're not going out. So, yeah, kind pressure is how I would recommend.
No, and
I know.
And as I meet with parents, I tell them, it's almost like a marriage. You're going to be together for a while.
Yeah, you are.
You've got to make it work.
Right.
One way or another. My younger child does have autism, and she goes out of district
to
school at the Grodin Center.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
It's been great.
Yep.
It's been great. And in terms of extended school year, I know that we usually do get that. I don't know necessarily what he's really doing there. Like, I know that they can't cover everything in those few weeks, but I don't want to give up that placement for him.
No.
I don't want to lose that placement.
Yeah, it's narrowed down. I mean, some districts are doing a ESY that's 4 weeks.
Ours was 3.
3.
3 weeks.
Right. When I started doing this work, that was not the case,
You know, so
right?
we don't want to lose a spot, but it's almost like, what can you do in
Right.
3 weeks?
And then the question is, you know, if you really have an issue, is it worth going to due process on an extended school year issue? You know, so.
Fortunately, we've been able to get that, so.
Oh, good.
The teachers and OT and physical therapy, they've been very good.
Mhm.
Being on the same page, but definitely document, copy everybody.
Right.
You know, especially when you're going for your initial meetings, pediatrician, EMT,
Yep.
cardiologist, everybody that
Yeah.
you think to have that documentation definitely helps. And bring copies of all your stuff, because you'll be surprised how many people show up and do not have their paperwork ready to go.
Right.
And that's just an added delay.
Keep have a binder, and keep everything in the binder. That way you have everything there, and you just build on that every year.
Just give it out.
Any other questions? Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure I understood. So for PT and OT services, you cannot have an IEP.
That's not, no, you can't.
That's not true.
Well, no, if, it depends on what the basis of the eligibility is. My son was clearly eligible. He had PT, he had OT, he had everything. So those might be related services under an IEP. But if the only issue is that the child can't say they're ours, but everything else is fine, then the child might not even need a 504 and just go out for speech. See the difference?
Yeah.
All right, the related services are related to the disability. So if you have a child who has a disability and they're eligible under IDEA, they're going to get services. If that disability affects their ability to walk, they're going to have physical therapy as a related service. Yeah.
So does the question become whether or not the PT or OT, the gross motor or the fine motor issues affect their classroom performance?
No.
Okay.
No.
Because
Maybe I'm not saying, I want to make myself clear on
my
this.
son has a gross motor delay, but cognitively he's fine.
But does,
I'm sorry, you know what might be helpful?
Yes.
Is if you just spend a couple of minutes talking about that whole qualification piece before the IEP. Because parents go to ET meetings,
Right.
expected to get an IEP, and I think that's what you might be talking about, like they're not, they may not even qualify.
Well, I have
for
a cognitive-
disability.
You mean as being eligible?
Child with PT and OT needs.
Right.
And as soon as they look at her, they hear her talk, they supposedly have evaluated her, but they haven't
All right.
spent the time to really know what the issues are, because they're
Right.
definitely there.
Okay.
But they're not picked up on just saying hello to her,
Okay.
you know?
The IDEA has a list of eligible disabilities, and sometimes there's a catch-all for that. If there's a determination that the child falls under one of those disabilities and therefore is eligible for services under IDEA, then you develop an IEP. You look at what the child's needs are, whether it's speech, PT, OT, and those are included in that IEP. If the child does not fall under those types of disabilities, okay, and the team says that child is not eligible for services under IDEA, that does not mean the child does not get speech or PT or something else under a 504, which in fact is only accommodations for education. Do you see? Have I made that clearer? So if there's an IEP, if the child is eligible, then it's an IEP with related services. My son has severe cognitive problems and has, club feet and can't walk. His physical therapy is going to be a part of that IEP, clearly. The question becomes, if the eligibility is found that it's not there, but the child has some need, then a 504 comes into play, and for educational purposes, they're given certain accommodations, okay?
But only as they apply. But in my mind, I think if she can't, say she goes to a school where there are stairs, and she is like gripping the side of the staircase, like trying to get up those stairs to get to wherever she has to go, and I'm not there.
She needs an accommodation. She needs an accommodation under 504. It's that simple.
Because that would be affecting her education.
Absolutely. But it doesn't sound like she needs an IEP under IDEA. She needs a 504 plan.
Kathleen, just to make you feel better,
one of Evie's biggest issues was that she couldn't walk when she was 3, when we were at the transition meeting from EI to Providence Public School System. She could not walk upstairs unassisted. So she was placed in a school in the district that had no stairs. They had to accommodate that for her. So she also has other needs, speech, OT, and PT, but so she has an IEP, but that is in her IEP.
So the way you go with this is hinged on eligibility. You get the full amount of services if you're under this IEP. If there's a determination that you're not eligible, depending on what it is, more often than not you'll get a 504, which is accommodations such as that issue with the stairs. Or it might be certain testing that the child has to sit somewhere because of testing or whatnot. Yeah.
Our daughter has epilepsy, and she's very petite and tiny. She has delays across the board, and she has physical therapy. And we just had we just went to Drum Rock last month, and one of the concerns is because she's so tiny, she has trouble climbing stairs. And when I said about the physical therapy, she has physical therapy, she has all the therapies, and they had said, well, there's no stairs here, so we don't need to provide physical therapy because there's no stairs. But it's still a thing of...
It's sort of the reverse, isn't it? I mean,
well, again, there's no
she's going to have stairs in her life.
She doesn't have to. So we actually vamped up physical therapy every week until she turns 3 because we're trying to help her out with these things.
Right.
But it was kind of a thing of, so, you know, what about the you know, going out to recess, and she doesn't have her balance that great, so physical therapy is a needed element.
Do you have a present IEP? You haven't done an IEP yet?
Well,
she's not at that point?
She's actually been in the, we've actually had early interventions
since
she was,
so you're still in, all right.
Since she was 4 months of age.
Right.
So, you know, we've been in that process, but, and with working with EI, we've always had, you know, if I have a concern, OT comes in and, you know.
I have to say, at 3, when they turn 3, like, you transition, you have no idea what you're transitioning into, and it's basically, if there's not like something like right there in front of someone's face, then you transition into, you're basically on your own.
And that is why I'm here tonight, because again, with them saying, well, there's no stairs, so she doesn't need physical therapy, it's a thing of, you know, I'm kind of, you know,
that age, as I said, I mean, that transition for us as parents and for a lot of parents is the hardest until you get to adult. And you got to be careful with it, not only the downside of what I mentioned about the districts just walking away from you on those initial IEPs, but what are they required to do? And parents oftentimes, when the child is 2 or 3, have had a great time with early intervention, and then all of a sudden it's, okay, now what do we do? And you know, you got to make the call as to whether to go with a 504 or an IEP. Districts more often will, because there's less services and they're stretched, will recommend a 504. And sometimes that works. Sometimes as the child grows, you relook at it and say, look, eligibility is an issue now, let's discuss it. And under the law, you have to have an eligibility determination by a team, not an IEP team because the child's not eligible, but an eligibility determination.
I do have one quick question too about the eligibility. Because my daughter has epilepsy, it's in other epilepsy.
It is.
And I was told at the Maddie Foundation that we should definitely try and push for other epilepsy.
Absolutely.
Instead of putting into any behavioral or, you know, whatever thing, because it's a whole, because like I said, she has speech, OT, physical therapy, she does have delays.
Regardless of the disability, that's a perfect example, go for the broader one on that list. Always go for the broader one because you're going to get broader services, always. You know, I mean, that's what IDEA is about. It's about kids with several various potential issues.
Now, but like in this IEP, do I say I want her?
Well, first you can't say you want her. It's a team decision as to whether or not she's eligible. And that eligibility under an epilepsy, you shouldn't have a problem depending on your district. I would be, well, I shouldn't say that. I mean, I think you'll be okay, but it depends on the district, and you know, some districts have closed the door a little bit on eligibility, but a child with epilepsy, I think, would be eligible. I mean, you'd have a good argument if they said no. Let me put it that way. Yeah.
Can you just talk a little bit about proving the need for extended school year? Like I have a son who hasn't qualified the last 2 years.
Okay.
Because they say, well, you know, over the summer he doesn't lose skills, but his rate of learning is so slow.
Yeah.
He's so far behind. I just wonder, how do you?
The test is, there's a United States District, a Rhode Island U.S. District Court opinion by Judge Patine from years ago that the issue is whether or not the child is regressing. Come September, if your child is not where the child was in May, then ESY is not working. So if there's regression during the summer,
So that's really the only kind of factor.
that's the only standard if there's regression. And sometimes the district will say, well, look, you know, the child was going to, all children regress during the summer. That's usually what they say. And my response to that is, well, with this child, you've got to determine that that regression is because of his disability, and if it is, you got to make a better ESY program. A lot of parents are telling me that certain districts are just shutting kids out of ESY that used to be in it even, just because it's so costly. And you know, you fight that fight, but fight it when your IEP comes around. Don't let them say, well, we'll deal with this. And
That's what happened. Ours in November, and they're like, oh, we got to get to know what was in the school.
no, you show them, the law says it's annual. It's annual. And then at least they've got to address it.
What, just talk about it?
Yeah. What is your ESY program?
Yeah.
I mean, if you just ask that question, you know, a district isn't going to say, we're not going to talk about, well, they might, but we're not going to talk about ESY now. We'll talk about that in April. And you say, no, it's an annual thing. What are you doing? Yeah.
Just to jump off that a little bit, so if your child does attend ESY and you still feel that their skills aren't the same in September as they were in June, you have an argument to then state for the next year that they need a different program. Like we're in that 3.5 weeks of
Right.
ESY, like,
Right.
and the child has significant delays. So that's one of our biggest concerns. Is number one, that the room's not appropriate and that it's not enough time, service time. So
Right, and remember that even in ESY, they don't have to have the exact same program, but they do in ESY have to have a program that is establishing that the child is not regressing.
So it's almost like we plan on supplementing it. So that's really the only way to make the argument is not to supplement it. Really.
You shouldn't have to supplement privately. You should be able to have extended school year services and it's going to be from alternative teachers. It might be in a different location. It probably will be nowadays in a different location. You know, back quite a few years, the districts were farming it out and the kids were going to various types of camps, and now they don't even have the money for that. So you got to but you got to advocate for your child. Yeah.
What about the emerging skills portion of qualification for ESY? Is there some language about that?
There is. I mean, the problem with that is that that qualification, as it relates to emerging skills, I don't think is clear at all. So, you know, depending on the needs of the child, if the child did not have ESY in year 1 and showed regression in September, then that is in essence an argument that that there are, you know, an effort to make the child become not regressing. You have to give them ESY in year 2. That's how I would recommend that. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit more about how to qualify teacher. I guess that's the first part of my question. The second part, if the school doesn't have what one of these animals are, if your child's particular disability, what responsibility does the school have to find one come out of house? Again, our child has been diagnosed with dyslexia, but the school doesn't appear to have anybody who can teach to that.
Well, that term was put into place, I think in '07 by Congress, and that level of skill is a certification that RIDE has. You will know if the teacher is a highly qualified teacher because RIDE has it as a certification. that does not mean it's specific to the disability, all right? So you're all able to see whether or not these teachers meet that burden. But keep in mind the practical aspect of this. For years, one of our nurses was an LPN, one of the best nurses we ever had. We always had a position that'd be an RN. But so you gotta sort of be careful with these categories. Oftentimes these categories aren't what's important. What's important is whether the person is doing the job or not. So, you know, if the person isn't doing the job and they don't have the right qualifications, then you've got a better argument. With dyslexia, you know, depending on the degree of it and whether you'd be going with a 504 or an IEP, and I'm not sure which situation you're in, they are either way going to be required to have somebody who can educate your child who knows dyslexia. Absolutely.
If the school doesn't have that person, what happens next?
They have to get one. Depending on the degree of dyslexia, they have to get one. If it's a 504 plan, they've got to make accommodations. Be aware those accommodations, as we spoke about, may include bringing the child somewhere where there is somebody who knows dyslexia and can educate based on dyslexia. They can't just say they don't have one.
A couple people brought up how they don't have a program, but the essence is you're not supposed to stick a child into a screw hole. You're supposed to create something that will meet the needs of the child.
Right.
And you might have to get a little assertive, get to know the laws, get to know, you know, what buttons to push. You want to go in with honey and a hat in your hand, but on the other hand, you want to do what's best for your child.
Right.
And it is a very big economic issue, as well as, you know, as well as the parents that are pushing for more athletics in the school. They're after the same big pot of money, and you know, you got to keep in touch with the school committee members and network with other parents. And every locality should have a special ed advisory committee. And go to those meetings, get them to know your face. I was co-chair of mine for 10 years. And I also got on the state special ed advisory committee.
Go to school communities. I went to
my
first one. And, you know, just listen and learn about different things. With the LA meeting, I did that too. And, you know, it's for the kids. And I think that's the hardest part, is because the teachers can't, you know, pass that information amongst parents, trying to get parents together and not to gang up on the district, but just to be involved and be aware and, you know what's what, because you've got to educate. You've got to educate yourself.
Right.
So that you know what you're fighting for.
Yeah.
Just building a little bit off that, I know you go in, you try to stay professional and things of that nature, but at what point do you seek out legal representation in this process, and can that send the wrong message?
Yeah, and oftentimes, depending on the situation, I'll ask parents, you know, do you want me to do things from behind the curtain, or do you want me to get involved and let them know I represent you? And we talk about that and make a joint decision on it. I don't necessarily go in, because a lot of things can happen when I go in, a lot of things that we necessarily don't want to happen. So what I would suggest is that, I can polarize people. I mean, and that's not what you want. You want to bring it together. So if it's at a point where due process, it looks inevitable, you need to contact counsel. If, however, you're still in the IEP meeting stage, you're still trying to talk about it, I rarely go to IEP meetings. I'm not a part of the team. I mean, I'll go, and if I go, the district's attorney goes by law. But, you know, normally I don't. But having said that, you know, if you're going to go to due process, you need somebody. Well, I highly recommend you not file for due process on your own. This area of litigation is extremely complex. To give you just a small idea, you're starting with Congress's law, then there's regulations, then there's OSEP, the Office of Special Education Population, which has its guidance. Then you have state law, then you have state regs, you have the Code of Federal Regulations. I mean, it is voluminous, and it's an evidentiary hearing. And there's a lot of factors involved, so just be aware of that. So I tell people, you know, don't go to due process unless you absolutely have to. Yeah.
On the changes slide, you talk about some of the changes on the IDEA, and that you can change an IEP without a meeting.
Right.
Can you just elaborate on that?
Sure. If there is something going on that either you, any member of the team feels is not working for this child, there can be a phone call, and it does require the parent's consent, but you can have a phone call where you say, look, we're doing this, we're thinking about going this route, and if everyone's in agreement, you don't need a meeting. One of the reasons these changes took place is because teachers and educators were in IEP meetings and not teaching. So they changed the law a little bit to allow for that, and to allow that, you know, not all, because in the old days, I'd sit down and I'd say, well, if this person's not here, this person's not, if the whole team's not here, we're going to have to do it again. Just to be difficult, probably, most of the time. I shouldn't have done that, but I can't do that anymore. If somebody who has authority is there, special ed teacher there, a regular educator if needed there, and parents, that's enough. Yeah.
I went to hearing in 91 and my son is now going to be 35, so, I mean, it was a while ago. But what they used to do is call a meeting, people would come in and sign that they were there, and then they'd go back to their classroom.
Yeah, that used to happen.
And then they'd continue the IEP, we'd never get closure on it.
Right.
And that was a way of delaying it. I mean, to me, it was a dirty tactic. But, you know, that was a way of wearing you down. You just sort of give up.
It was. I mean, it is difficult, and it's difficult for teachers to be in an IEP meeting all the time because you're never teaching. You're just in meetings. So, Congress changed it, and they made it a little bit easier to get to the bottom line of an IEP.
Yeah, but was that for the district or for the child and the family?
Well, I think it was for the district. I mean, yeah. I mean, in the same legislation, prevailing party status. So, if you're the prevailing party at a due process hearing, as a parent, you're entitled to attorney's fees. That same year, they changed the legislation to say that if the district is a prevailing party, they can obtain attorney's fees from the parents. It's horrible legislation. No one in Rhode Island, no district in Rhode Island has pushed that issue, but I'm required to tell my clients that. You know, I mean, it's so.
So do your clients pay you directly, or do you have to file in federal court to get paid?
Well, there is a retainer, and then if I'm the prevailing party and a prevailing party status, I file in district court for my attorney's fees. But I got to be careful doing that because oftentimes the district will piggyback on that petition to reverse whatever prevailing thing I did, and I may lose the whole ball game. So I got to be careful when I do that.
Why would they reverse the decision?
Well, because either party can appeal to the district court. So let's say I go to a due process hearing and I win, and I file for my attorney's fees, and they file a counterclaim saying that not only do I not get my attorney's fees, but the hearing officer, the impartial hearing officer for the due process hearing was wrong. Then the district court takes all of that. And if you don't, regardless of attorney fees, you don't want to upset what you prevailed on. Yeah.
The IEP document itself should be written for 1 full year.
Correct.
Including summer.
Correct. An annual.
Not excluding summer.
No. There's nothing in any legislation that I've seen that alters the IDEA, which says that every IEP has to be an annual IEP. It can be reviewed anytime, but it's an annual IEP.
I just have a quick question. My daughter is getting services here at Meeting Street. She's 4. She originally had a diagnosis of cerebral palsy, but I didn't believe it. So I said, I'm going to just go somewhere else. But anyway, she had an evaluation with a neurologist at Children's Hospital in Boston. And at that time, he said to me when I was leaving the office, and she was only 20 months or something, as she grows up and starts to need services, I can help you with that. And I thought to myself, how would he even know to say that to me? But now I'm seeing what's happening, because he diagnosed her with developmental coordination disorder. She's been receiving services here at Meeting Street for, well, the whole time, but when she turned 3, then it was like a private process. And for that, I was just notified maybe 2 months ago that my insurance company didn't pay for those services because she has a diagnosis of developmental coordination disorder on her now. And they feel that the school system should be providing her services for her with that kind of a diagnosis. So I am now like wondering, I went back and asked them to then, I submitted all her paperwork from her doctors in Rhode Island about the cerebral palsy and said, listen, she also has been told that she has this diagnosis, but I didn't really want to, I still don't know if I think that that's what it is, but in any case, I felt that I didn't want to burden the school or myself with those kind of things, and the school system has told me that you know, that they can't service her right now.
And as a result, since they can't, she's 3?
She's 4.
She's 4. And they say they can't service her, and you're getting services here?
I am. We're paying, you know, we're paying for this.
Well, no, I mean, that's, what needs to be done in your case is that you need to go back to the district and not accept that answer. That answer is unacceptable.
That's what I was feeling, but, you know, that's the problem. She walks in and she's very cognitively there, and so they look at her and, you know, they say she's age appropriate, but still, she's getting PT and OT here.
Right.
Did they actually evaluate her? And
right.
She came out age appropriate on those evaluations for motor evaluation?
For motor, no. She came out like a 2.5-year-old.
That should be enough for criteria for eligibility.
Yeah, absolutely. You should be able to bring those evaluations with you, say she's eligible, and
I got the evaluations today. I was at the school department today. They didn't even read them.
Bring them to an IEP meeting. Just sending them to the school.
She was screened supposedly as a 4-year-old today, and they screened her and tested her, and I sat right in the room with them, and then they said to me, she's age appropriate.
Go to the state that your evaluations demonstrating significant delay, and that you would like to present them, and if they would like to do a formal evaluation of the home, then they can. That's what we were saying about. They either have to accept your evaluations or they need to do one of their own.
Or explain why they're rejecting yours. And age appropriate is not appropriate. It's not.
That's what they told me, right? She's age appropriate.
You got to do a little bit of fighting there. Because they won't acknowledge it so long as you're paying.
Yeah, I mean, you're paying.
That's the bottom line.
The Street called me, and they didn't even call me. My PT said to me, I don't know if you got the email, but Isabel's bills haven't been paid for like a year. And I'm like, what? So when I called the insurance company, they said, well, it's because of the diagnosis they have her listed under. It's developmental coordination disorder. So it's a developmental problem, so the school system should be paying for that.
Well, you can do one of two things. I think you need to nudge your school system, but also talk to your neurologist relative to changing that diagnosis. If the doctor thinks that it should be changed.
Well, yeah, I mean, he then...
Because then there's no issue.
Prescriptions using neurologic terms like apraxia and different words that it's being, I think it's being paid. My husband said he's seeing things come through that say it's being paid now.
Oh, okay.
But it was a year of like,
right.
And when I heard that, I like panicked because I thought, oh my God, I'm going to be responsible for,
no.
She gets PT and OT every week.
No, I mean, the bottom line is IDEA is designed so that you're not burdened with that. It really is. I mean, it's one of the things. There are some areas. I mean, the hardest part of IDEA is when I have clients who want to go from a present public school setting to a setting like this. That's one of the most difficult cases because the stay put, at least the last agreed upon placement, was the school district. So now I've got to try and fight and get this and do a two-pronged test. One, that the district is not educating the child appropriately, and where the child should be going, i.e. Meeting Street, is appropriate. Those are the toughest cases. So.
Is that still like that?
Yeah.
It's worse. Because I feel like as a parent of a kid I'm in Providence, and my child has been in the public school system since 3. I feel like I have no options. I feel like this is my only option, is the current system, because he needs on-site services.
No, I mean, there's plenty of options now. The only question is whether or not the district will pay for them, really. And if the district...
The district says they can provide his services in the current setting.
Right.
Do you have any recourse?
Yes. If that's what happens. The district says the child is being educated fine in this setting. You need to gather all of your documents. You need to look at it. If you know in your gut the child is not progressing but regressing, you go look at the classroom, you see what's going on, you get evaluations. Don't just file for due process. Make sure your ducks are in a row. Do all of these things. Have your ammunition so that when you go into that next IEP meeting, you can say, this child is not progressing. These evaluations establish the child's not progressing, and we want this placement. They're going to say no, and that's when you file due process.
So you have to prove that, because one thing I think with the public school system, in particular in Providence, 26 kids in a classroom, it's big.
Yeah, that is a big
For
classroom.
regular ed, and my kid has a one-on-one, which is great, but I look at some other things like the charter schools, which have a smaller ratio, or there are some other options, but it doesn't seem like they're able to meet the supports.
Who's they? The city? Providence?
Well,
or?
I just can't, I just don't know enough about it. Let's say like Full Copy School, for
Mhm.
instance, and I've never looked into it, but I just have the sense as a parent that they're not going to be able to meet his services and his needs there.
Right.
But I just don't know.
Right, and that's the hard part about being a parent. You've got to go, let's say that's what the district's recommending, some placement you don't, in your gut, think is going to be right. You've got to go through the motions, you got to look at it, you got to hear what they say, and then you've got to rationally say no, and not because I know my child and that's not going to work, because so-and-so who did this evaluation says it's not going to work, so-and-so who does this evaluation says it's not going to work. And if those are doctors, they're going to come back and say, yeah, but they're not educators. So you say, okay, well, this educator says it's not going to work. So you really got to get everything. These are the hardest cases to get your child into a private school in terms of what we call reimbursement cases. They're tough, tough cases.
Actually, when I did my initial, we went for the eligibility meeting, we did Meeting Street for early intervention. They came with us, and my daughter was with me. My daughter is a complete safety hazard, high tolerance for pain. She will get out, even in this secure area, she can get out. But when we went to the eligibility meeting, I asked them to pull back and just let her be her. And she literally tore the room apart. And I said, this is what it is every day. I would love for them to go to school together, but I said, that's just, knowing my son's an inclusive teacher, great teacher, but I said, it's too small.
Right.
She needs a one-to-one. It's not going to be beneficial for her. It's not going to be beneficial for the teachers or the other kids.
Did you get eligibility?
She got eligibility, and they gave us room right on the spot.
Yeah.
And another thing too, I noticed the LEAs, some of the people will promise you everything under the sun. Until it's in writing, it doesn't matter. So you definitely have to stay on top of them. If you're quick to critique, follow it up with a compliment. My LEA, told me I could have so many stars, and we would call back to document that stuff. So then it ended up going to the special ed director. Yes, she's great, but we need to get these things done because time is ticking.
Right.
And they were very good.
Oh, that's good. Good. Any other questions?
What are your recommendations for moving if you have a kid in IEP, you're going to a new school district?
In the same state?
Right.
Okay, because it's different if you're going to a different state. If you're going into the same state, the law requires that the IEP that's in place be followed by the new district, okay, until they can reconvene for a transition meeting and they including you as parent, implement a new IEP. But if you, on day 2, decide to go over from into the new district, at that point in time, they've got the IEP travels with your child. Okay.
Until it expires, or until they have a
yeah, it's not until it expires. They can meet and say, look, I've had a lot of cases where Pathways comes into the district, and then the parent moves, and the new district says, for autistic children, we don't use Pathways, we use this person. And but it's a tough case because they're following the same IEP, they're just not using Pathways. So those can be difficult cases. So if you remember that the IEP travels with your child, and have a transition meeting. And when you have those transition meetings, have the old district or people who know your child in the old district come. That's really important. Sure.
My daughter started transition from early intervention to the school department. She's 2.5 now. So I've heard already little comments that she might not be approved for an IEP.
Okay.
And for 504 a few times. If they say she qualifies for a 504, does that mean that she doesn't get placement in a classroom?
No. Okay. Did she have a family plan? Does she have an IF?
Yes.
Okay. Then you would start by working off the family plan. And there's an issue of eligibility. Is that what you're telling me? Whether she's eligible for?
She's borderline for a classroom placement.
Okay, and again, it follows it would follow the. You mean when you say a classroom placement? What are you referencing versus?
Well, just putting her like in a half-day preschool class.
Oh, I see. Yeah. I see. Use your evaluations to make that determination as to what she can tolerate, what she can't tolerate. And you're entitled to an eligibility meeting. Right. And if she's determined that she's not eligible, I got to think of the age for 504, but you're not there yet.
Okay.
So she would be, yeah, there's not going to be accommodations yet. And there's probably not going to be, I mean, you can have these meetings, but it won't be until she starts kindergarten that there's going to be an issue with a full IEP.
Okay.
Okay.
And how do I find out if her diagnosis is IDEA qualified?
Well, many are, and there's a catch-all at the end of that list, but I can't think of the section. 1415, but I don't recall. I'll have to look it up and get back to you on it, but there's a lot now. There's a lot now. It keeps getting wider and wider. So depending on what her diagnosis is, she may be. And
I'm wondering, because she has a rare genetic syndrome, and a lot of people don't even know what it is. So I just wonder where it falls.
That's exactly. My son was the same way. My son's never been diagnosed, but he had obvious disabilities. It depends on how she progresses to that point where you determine an IEP or a 504, and then you'll make that determination as a team.
Okay.
Yeah.
What happens if the child has a 504 and you go through the process of accommodation and what they're accommodating is not working, and how do you get to the push when you know they can qualify for IEP?
Then you let them know that, well, first off, when you say you know, depending on the diagnosis, make sure you have your evaluation. You ask for an eligibility meeting, and you say, look, this isn't working. You indicate why it's not working. You look at evaluations that say this is, provided that your child falls under one of the categories and that category affects their education and other aspects, as we talked about, then you push for it at that eligibility meeting. If they say no, then you're going to have a determination of eligibility. But you can't just go in and say she's not, or he's not progressing. You've got to have some pretty concrete evidence as to why an IEP is needed.
Well, I've been told every single year by teachers that he needs something, but then the accommodations, they give you the runaround of saying they have to be in that accommodation for 12 weeks to give a chance to work. It's basically kind of the runaround.
Right,
so,
right.
That's what I realized.
Yeah, if you push the issue on eligibility, you might just find that they will give her or him an IEP.
Yeah. I want to say sometimes the teachers know what's good, but they're afraid to speak up because of the administrator, and they don't want to get in trouble. And that, I mean, they'll tell you, don't say I said this, but this is happening, and you're putting like monkey in the middle, but I mean, you at least know somebody's verifying it in their own mind, you know, but it's very awkward.
Anything else? All right. Good luck.
Thank you.
You're welcome.